In the year 2020, UPSC had a very interesting question on emotional intelligence. Let me read out that question. What are the main components of emotional intelligence? Can they be learned? In this episode, I'll walk you through not only the main components, but also the way to write an answer for this question. Let's start with this. If you read the question carefully, you will notice there are two parts to the question. Part 1 is about the main components of emotional intelligence. Part 2 of the question is, can they be learned? Now, if you focus on the question, the word is main. UPSC does not want you to explain the components. It wants you to talk about the main components. The components which actually contribute to emotional intelligence, the main ones. Second part, can you learn those components? So, when writing an answer, you have to learn to connect both. Now, in this episode, I will not be talking about emotional intelligence per se. In other words, I'll not define emotional intelligence because this is something I've done in the earlier episode. If you have not seen the earlier episode, I'll recommend all of you to see that episode first, then you come down to this. Because in the earlier episode, I defined emotional intelligence and discussed the components very briefly. So watch that, then you come here. All right. So today, let's talk about the components. When I say components, it means abilities, it means skills. These are the abilities or skills, practicing which it makes you emotionally competent. And emotional competency contributes to not only personal life success but also professional success as well. So that's why we have to talk about these competencies. Before we move on, let me clarify one thing. When I say components, this means skills. This also means abilities. It also means capabilities. In other words, emotional intelligence is a set of abilities or set of skills. And that means every skill makes a component of emotional intelligence. So don't get confused in the exams all while listening to my lecture when I use the word components, skills, abilities interchangeably. I hope you will remember that. Now, when we talk about components of emotional intelligence, every scholar has identified a certain set of skills. In fact, a lot of them. The concept of EI comes into existence, or for the first time it was defined in 1991. Salovey and Mayer did that. After 1991, over the period of years, a lot of scholars have contributed to identifying different emotional competencies. For the purpose of this exam and for the purpose of this episode, I'll limit the components only to three sets of scholars. One, Salovey and Mayer. Two, Bar-on. Three, Daniel Goleman. The first set of scholars I'm going to call upon is Salovey and Mayer, my favorites. Salovey and Mayer identified four abilities. The first emotional intelligence component identified by Salovey and Mayer was perceiving emotion. And this refers to our ability to perceive emotions in ourselves and in others. Second component is using emotions. In other words, can you use emotions to guide your thinking? Can you use emotions to help you make better decisions? Third component that Salovey and Mayer pointed out was understanding emotions. Do you understand emotional language? Do you understand emotional vocabulary? Do you understand emotion when somebody else expresses it? Oh, that brings me to a big question. How do you express emotion, by the way? Humans express emotion in two ways. One, we use language, that is words, and other is the non-verbals. The skill of understanding the words and the non-verbals is the next competency, understanding emotions. The last competency Salovey and Mayer pointed out was managing emotions. And this refers to our ability to manage and moderate negative emotions, or I should say, impact of emotions. After Salovey and Mayer, let me bring on Bar-on here. Bar-on combined emotional and social competencies and gave us a list of 5 very interesting emotional components or emotional intelligence components. The first component that Bar-on insisted on was intrapersonal. Intrapersonal means within oneself. In simple words, it's about self-awareness. The second component that Bar-on insisted upon was interpersonal. When I say interpersonal, that means between two people. For example, when you meet somebody else, when you meet your friend or a relative, are you comfortable expressing emotions? Are you able to read their emotions? Third component that Bar-on insisted upon was adaptability. In other words, how flexible are you emotionally? A simple example. For example, at home, you'll have a different emotional equation with your mother and different one with your father because you adapt yourself to their emotional demands. Interesting, right? You don't have similar emotional responses to your mom and dad. You have a different relationship. With mother, you have a different one. With father, you have a different one. Interesting, right? That is what is called adaptability. You quickly adapt. The fourth and my favorite component, it's called stress management. Are you under stress? Simple question. And I can see most of you smile and nod your head. Yes, of course. And that's what Bar-on points out. If you really want to succeed in life, you learn to absorb stress. Tolerating stress, it matters. It's quite a surprise that you guys talk about stress. Just imagine next time as you're watching the video, you're sitting at home. Just imagine, look at your mom, look at your mother. For last 30 years of her life, she's been standing and cooking 4 hours every day, 3 different meals. Can you imagine the stress your mother must be under? But she never talks about stress. Now the last component of Bar-on, that's called general mood. Generally, what kind of a person are you? Are you a happy person? Are you an optimistic person? That's general mood. Last scholar I'm going to talk about is Goleman. Goleman organized 18 competencies into 4 sets. 18 competencies into 4 sets. The first set he spoke about was self-awareness. It's again similar to what Bar-on spoke about, emotional self-awareness 1. Second part, Bar-on added one more thing. You need to when you talk about self-awareness, we should not be over-assessing ourselves or under-assessing ourselves. It's about having an accurate assessment of our own self. After self-awareness, the next competency Goleman emphasized on was self-management. It's about managing your own self, managing your emotions, managing the impact of your emotions, self-management. The third competency, according to Goleman, is other-focused. It is social awareness. And here the competencies Goleman is talking about is empathy. Are you socially aware? When you're interacting with people around, are you empathetic? Do you listen to them? The last competency that Goleman spoke about was relationship management. And when I say relationships, it's about the interpersonal relationships we have in life. And speak of relationship, a question for all of you to think about. Tell me something which is most easiest in a relationship. Starting a relationship, maintaining a relationship, or closing a relationship. Which is the most easiest? Think about it. And do let me know in the comment section. And speak of relationships, Goleman added a very important component in relationship management. That's called conflict management. We all have conflicts. So how do you manage a conflict? What do you do when there's a conflict? How do you manage? Do you give in? Do you compromise? Or do you impose yourself in the conflict? What do you do? And seriously, your conflict management skills decide all your relationships. We have discussed components given out by 3 different scholars. Salovey Mayer, they gave 4. Bar-on gave 5. Goleman gave 4. These are huge numbers. But what the question was, what are the main components? Can you identify the main components? I'm sure you should be able to. Why don't you do this? Why don't you identify the main components and share it with me in the comments? Meanwhile, in the next episode, I'll discuss the main components and I'll also talk about how to frame an answer for this. Till then, happy learning.